Okay, so most of the plants that we've been talking about in these lessons just live in conditions where there's not massive changes in temperature, not massive changes in the amount of rainfall, just kind of stays pretty much the same. But actually, we also find plants living in extreme environments. So have a look at these two pictures here. On the left-hand side, we've got a snowy picture, and on the right-hand side, we've got a desert picture. So just pause the video for a minute and just think about the types of conditions that these plants have to cope with. Okay, so let's look at the snowy picture first. So their environment is going to be really cold. They're going to have to be able to cope and survive in cold temperatures. It's probably going to be windy, which is likely to try and blow those plants over. They're going to have snow landing on their leaves, which is going to be heavy and which might cause some of their branches to snap. And although you look at that picture and you think, okay, there's lots of water around, actually that water is frozen. It's not in the liquid form that they would normally take up through their root hair cells. On the right hand side, we've got the desert picture. So the obvious things there, it's going to be really hot, it's going to be really dry. But those cactus plants there are able to survive. Okay, so here we've got two types of trees. We're going to focus on trees living in snowy and cold environments to start with. On the left of this table we have deciduous trees. Now deciduous trees are trees that lose their leaves in the winter, and there are reasons for that, why they do that. On the right hand side we've got these coniferous trees. These are like your Christmas trees with kind of pine cones or pine needles, and they tend to live in colder environments. So have a little look at these statements here and try to match which ones go with deciduous trees and which ones go with coniferous trees. So pause the video, have a go at that, just write down your answers on a piece of paper and then we'll look at the answers in a minute. Okay, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at those and they're fairly straightforward, the answers. So let's look at the deciduous trees first. So they are going to lose their leaves in the winter. They lose them, one, to stop water loss. If they don't have leaves, they don't have stomata, of course they can't then lose water vapour through their stomata. They also lose their leaves to stop them being blown over. If you think about a windy day in the summer, when those trees have got their leaves, they really blow about in the wind and trees are often actually blown over on those kind of days. But by getting rid of their leaves in the winter, when it's actually the most windy, it does stop them from being blown over. They also lose their leaves so that snow doesn't collect on them. Snow can be quite heavy on the leaves, it can snap leaves off, it can snap branches, and so by not having their leaves, they stop this from happening. So now let's look at the coniferous plants or trees. So they've got pine cones and they also have needle-shaped leaves. Those needle-shaped leaves have a much smaller surface area, so again it reduces water loss. They have also got a really thick waxy cuticle to stop water loss. By having those needle-shaped leaves, it means that on a windy day the wind just blows in between those small leaves, and so it doesn't catch it and blow those trees over. The small needle-shaped leaves also stop snow collecting, so the snow can fall down in between the leaves. Before we go on to another adaptation that some plants have to stop them from losing water in transpiration, I'm just going to recap diffusion. So if you look at this picture here, basically we've got a beaker of water and we've put some dye or an oxo cube into that water, and we give it a bit of time, we don't stir it, we just leave it as it is, and over time what will happen is that dye or that oxo cube will spread evenly amongst the water. And so that's happening by diffusion. The particles are moving from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration until they are evenly spread. So another thing that goes along with that is how quickly diffusion is going to happen. So if we have a steep gradient, and there we've got a steep slide, use that at the top of that slide, you would move to the bottom really quite rapidly. And that represents a steep concentration gradient. So it's like we've got a high concentration of whatever the particles are and a very low concentration. And so we know that those particles will diffuse really quickly from the area of high concentration to low concentration. If, however, we don't have very much difference between the concentrations, so here we've got a very flat slide, then the particles will diffuse across more slowly. Okay, so this is one way that some plants can stop water loss from their leaves. So what they actually have is they have sunken stomata. So if you look at this picture, on the right hand side you can see the epidermis. Okay, and normally you would expect to find the guard cells along in a row with the epidermis, but here to the left of the epidermis, in there we have the sunken stomata with the guard cells on each side. And what that means is that when water evaporates from the spongy mesophyll cells into the airspace, which is where it's written sunken stomata, that's the airspace there, we get a build-up of water vapour. That water vapour will diffuse out through those stomata, but it stays trapped in that little region between the epidermal cells, the epidermis there, which means that less water is then going to evaporate and move out of the leaf. So that's like those slides we've just looked at. What we have is we end up with a water vapour concentration in the airspace and a water vapour concentration just outside those stomata, which is pretty similar, and because it's really similar, we have very little diffusion and loss of water vapour. So one type of plant that does have sunken stomata are cacti. They obviously found in really dry, arid conditions, so they want to try and reduce water loss as much as possible because there isn't very much water around, so any that they do have, they want to hold on to. They have a really thick, waxy cuticle on the outside to prevent water loss, and they also have really fleshy stems to store any water that they have managed to take in. The other thing that cacti do is they only open their stomata at night. So during the night, when the stomata are open, carbon dioxide will diffuse in, and then that remains in those air spaces until daylight when the stomata shut, and then during the day photosynthesis happens and that carbon dioxide is used up. Cacti also don't have leaves. What they've done is they've converted their leaves into spines. So that's actually the cactus's leaves, and that then reduces the surface area for which water vapour can be lost.